Puerto Rico. The president is tweeting again this morning on Puerto Rico. Somewhat toned down. We have done a great job with the almost impossible situation in Puerto Rico. Outside of the fake news or politically motivated ingrates, people are now starting to recognize the amazing work that has been done by FEMA and our great military. All buildings are now inspected for safety. Thank you to the governor of PR and to all of those who are working so closely with our first responders. Fantastic job. Charlie Sykes, you tweeted yesterday when the president went on his tweet storm in the morning against the mayor of San Juan that he was sending talking points to his base, that was the purpose of that tweet.
Well, it was kind of a dog whistle. Look, Hanlon's razor says, never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity. So maybe you just have a president who has, lacks the self-control, who just lashes out at any criticism. Yeah, but on the other hand, he did it in the context of a president who never wants to take responsibility. And what you had yesterday, you had 18 tweets in 11 hours where you saw thin-skinned, finger-pointing anger. You saw that kind of, Trumpian, don't blame me. Look at those other people who are incompetent down there. You're very much the anti-Harry Truman. So that was a signal to his base and to his fanboys out there. But on the other hand, he's Donald Trump. He can't contain himself.
Joey, here's what Eric Erickson wrote yesterday. He goes, "It should matter to all of us that the president is so willing to get in the mud and fight back when the mayor and everyone else in Puerto Rico need our empathy and compassion. Sometimes the president just does not need to dial up the jackass, and sometimes he does not need to be defended."
Yeah, but Donald Trump is just being himself, right? He's channeling his base. He's talking to them, but he's also channeling them. I mean, before Donald Trump started tweeting, some of the more sort of prominent members of his base were calling the mayor even worse names than that, saying she was a murderer, she belonged in jail. He was getting these signals, and he's giving them because he shares their view. And it is interesting that Donald Trump's reflex is to say that a woman of color, is an ingrate, or to attack her, or to say the people of Puerto Rico essentially are too lazy to help themselves, want something from the federal government that they won't provide to themselves. He actually went on that tweet storm, which was the most he had talked about Puerto Rico at all. A year to the day after he attacked Alicia Machado, the former Miss Universe. Donald Trump has a particular reflex to attack women of color, and to signal boost to his base this idea that people of color are lazy and dependent and won't do for themselves. He's sharing that with a large portion of his base.
David Brooks, a lot of people see a pattern here. I mean, because we forgot the Gold Star dad, Kaiser Khan, who happened to be Muslim. There was Steph Curry last week, an NBA basketball player of color. There appears to be a pattern.
Yeah, well, if you look at the Republican Party and you ask them, do you think there's as much discrimination against white people as against everybody else? A large percentage say yes. How strong is white identity for a lot of Republicans? For about 47% of the Republican Party, the sense of being white and whiteness is a strong identity factor. For the other half, not so much a factor. They believe in conservative ideas are good for everybody. And Donald Trump is playing for the white identity party. And therefore, it's becoming harder operationally to be a Republican without suddenly siding with that. And so the other half of the party has to decide, can we side with a guy who's constantly dragging us into racial identity politics over and over again in a way that becomes offensive? I've been a conservative for 30 years, going to all these magazines. I never used to hear racial stuff at conservative gatherings. But now it's suddenly become very hard to be a Republican and not be somehow associated with something racially reprehensible.
Danny, I was surprised that the secretary didn't have at least some pullback on the president's tweet in the mayor.
I think that the secretary has managed to please the president by defending him gently and deflecting effectively. The problem is exactly as David laid it out. The question is, when do you want to separate yourself from the president? When do you, at a certain moment, decide that your own reputation, whether you're a Republican or just as an individual, is more important? And this really is the great dividing line. This is where you see the people like Bob Corker separating themselves off. This is where you see people actually deciding, I don't want to be part of this anymore. The question is why more of the Republican Party, frankly, why more conservatives aren't willing to do that. Eric Erickson has been very courageous throughout this, but I've been shocked by the number of people who aren't willing to stand up and say, hey, you're actually not speaking for me.
Charlie, that's been the point of your whole book. I mean, it's as if Danny was like teeing you up here, but explain.
Well, part of it is you do have the people who just made the Faustian bargain that they're going to enable, that they're going to look the other way because they're going to get tax cuts. And then, of course, you have the orange Kool-Aid drinkers who are doing all of that. And this is going to leave a stain on the Republican Party. This is going to leave a stain on conservatives for a generation. But, let's go back to, this comparison with Katrina, whether or not this is Trump's Katrina. This could actually be worse, because Katrina was about indifference and incompetence. This is about mean-spiritedness. And also the, let them eat cake imagery that we're getting from this administration. Yesterday was his 67th day spent at one of his golf clubs, and he's sitting at this golf club tweeting out attacks against a mayor who is, wading through sewage trying to save people's lives. People are dying. This is a natural disaster. This is understandable. So yes, it's race, but it's class, it's also competence. It's just the lack of human empathy. Where's the hope?
Yeah, I think it's important to separate the tweeting from the reality.
Yeah.
And so the tweeting is what it is. But it strikes me that the actual aid effort to Puerto Rico is like a C+. And I've been sort of watching, are the institutions of our government still functioning under this administration? There are a lot of really great people in government who are still trying to keep their head down, do their job. And I've been moderately impressed that
where's
still some...
Where's the leadership? Where's the hope? You have it with the NFL in Puerto Rico, these moments where we would normally come together as a country, and you have the president who gratuitously stokes the culture wars and turns this into political division. So the tweet, it's not just a tweet problem, it's a leadership problem.
And in a situation like that, that is what the president does. The ceremonial function of president is to sort of explain to the nation what our values are in this moment. The problem that George W. Bush had was an optical problem where he seemed indifferent. Donald Trump, to your point, is evincing malice. He's evincing what we eventually did see in Katrina, this idea that the people who were, suffering in New Orleans were at fault, that they were people who were undeserving and unworthy. That had a racial component. This has a racial component. The difference is George W. Bush wasn't leading the white tribalism that did eventually get turned on the people in the Katrina situation. Donald Trump is leading it.
And by the way, if he wonders if there isn't going to be an electoral impact, I introduce you to Central Florida on that. There are a lot of angry Puerto Rican voters in Central Florida that this may cost him down the road. When we come back, one of the country's leading social critics, Ta-Nehisi Coates. We're going to talk about